Hi there, I'm Jen Kramer. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Durability and Design magazine. Welcome to our panel discussion on coated concrete and polished concrete. With me today are Phil Siciliani, the owner of Specialty Coatings and Consulting, Kevin Brown with KTA, and Jim Cuviello with Cuviello Concrete and Terrazzo. The coating application can be easily verified to have been correctly installed, but concrete floor that's been polished to maximum refinement is more difficult to verify. How can this confusion be addressed and basically combated?
There's a few things that come to mind that can be done to verify that owners are getting what they're paying for or what's in the specification. First, I think you need to understand what is in the specification because a lot of specs will require equipment, tooling, the type of densifier. The tough thing about that is you about have to be on site to verify those things. So from my experience, unannounced audits going in during the project to verify these things has been a successful way to determine if the owner is getting what they're paying for. Because looking at it after the fact, you may not know if they did steps 2, 3, and 4. You may only see that it's a shiny floor, but it may go away if some of those steps are skipped. Also doing a mock-up is I think helpful, establishing that that acceptance criteria up front. That way the owner knows what they're getting at the end of the project. Having things like acceptance criteria for the amount of aggregate exposed, and also gloss, color if it's a dyed floor, having an acceptance color criteria. Gloss meters are a very good tool to use for verifying gloss. There's usually a gloss number in the specification. So there's several things like that can be done.
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin's right. There's a lot of things that need to happen within a specification. One of them, most important, is to really identify the aesthetic look of the floor. What is the owner or the architect trying to achieve, which goes back to identifying a degree of cut, the amount of aggregate exposure, and so forth. And then actually identifying how high of a polish that they actually want. How high do they actually want of the shine do they want? Are they looking for a matte or a semi-polished or a highly polished floor? The difficulty in the industry has always been that all of this has been very subjective. For somebody to come in and look at a floor and say, okay, that's shiny. But the way that we look at it and the Concrete Polishing Association looks at it is that we don't look necessarily at shine or gloss. We look at clarity of reflection, distinction of image. When you look at a granite countertop, when you look at that, it's like a mirror. You see clarity. And that's what polished concrete is really about. Clarity equals durability. The more clarity you have, the more durability that you have inherently built into the finish. So what the association and we've been working on over the last year is actually the use of profile meters, which actually has a diamond tip stylus and will actually measure down to 1/1,000,000 of an inch and allow us to read the actual scratch profiles. And then there's also meters like this, which are basically a distinction of image meter, which allows us to actually read not just gloss, but to read the actual distinction, the clarity of that actual image. So by using these instruments, we can actually, instead of doing surprise visits, which currently is the best way to do it, we can take profile meter readings at the end and actually tell what has and hasn't been done according to the profile that's been made throughout the process.
Thank you. Phil, do you?
This is a little bit out of my league here. The technical end of it, just from a coding standpoint, I think what we see from a coating standpoint is, does the customer get what they pay for? A lot of times you can tell by going in and doing a thickness reading, and that'll tell you what the thickness is of the coating. Sometimes you'll find that if a contractor is telling a customer he's putting this material down, and a lot of times you'll see other materials put down. You know, they'll substitute, you know, maybe a lower grade material on a base and then put a top coat. So, you know, it's kind of, you know, educating the customer, I think, is the, you know, my feeling. We need to educate a customer more so of, you know, what he's actually getting, what he's actually paying for. And, you know, with the concrete polishing, it's, like I say, I've seen where they'll come in and put a guard in to get the shine up versus, you know, polishing all the ways up that they're supposed to. So, you know, I think it happens in both industries. I think you see it on the coating end, and you see it on the polish end.
Just a real quick point about guards is, in the polishing industry, everybody misapplies the guards. Guards are meant to be impregnating and microfilming. You know, they're not meant to be piled on and to become a topical coating, which a lot of people do, right, to achieve their gloss values.
Yeah. And the best way to avoid a guard would then be for the customer to what? To have a third-party inspector there, or?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, is to use third-party inspections where they would actually come in and use the distinction of image and the profile meters and be able to test whether the readings are being done before the guard is actually applied or not.
Mm-hmm.
What maintenance is required to preserve a coated concrete floor?
A lot of it is cleaning. It's educating an owner after he's had a concrete floor or a tile floor to use the proper chemicals. A lot of times you'll see them using chemicals that they clean concrete with, which could be an acidic or a caustic chemical. So we try to encourage them to use more like a cleaner, like a simple green or even Dawn liquid detergent, and that you will degrease and clean and not, you know, damage if you have a coating that doesn't have good chemical resistant. Always encourage they can use mechanical cleaning. We always recommend a soft bristle, soft pads, and the third thing is we always encourage them to do like a 6-month or 9-month inspection. And in areas where they have a lot of drop and fall, damage to the coating, is if they can take care of those issues before they become bigger, that usually preserves the floor quite a bit. So that's, you know, in industries where you have a lot of damage to the floors. Mm-hmm. So that's you know, maintenance-wise, is we see the problem with the floor down glossing or whatever is typically using abrasive pads, and just the way they're cleaning it is typically what we see. Again, every industry is different.
Phil kind of, you know, hit the nail on the head. It's education. I mean, getting proper education to owners and getting that actually to get conveyed down to actually the people performing the work. And, you know, what we like to do is we like to actually do in-services throughout the year. So, for example, if we polish concrete floor, what we like to do is come back X number of months, we come up with an agreement that we'll come up with at no additional charge, come in and actually do in-house services, because the maintenance staff is constantly overturning, which has always been a big problem. But the general maintenance for polished concrete is removing the dry debris. Well, first is actually catching the dry debris actually at the entrance by using proper entrance matting, catch the debris there. Actually, 80% of the dirt that is brought into a building is brought in on the bottom of the people's feet. So if you can use proper entrance matting. And then the second thing is the dry removal of the debris before you actually do any wet removal. And then the second part is, and that's ideally done with a back-vac vacuum cleaner, because it actually captures it, bags it, and then you can take it out of the building instead of where as a dust mop, we'll just push it and have it go all over the place. And then the next part is actually using some type of a wet method. The best way to do that is with an auto scrubber that puts down clean solution, scrubs it, and picks it up. Whereas a mop and a bucket, you're constantly getting dirty water that's just getting reapplied to the surface again. So those key things are really important to preserve a polished concrete surface, and pretty much any surface.
As a follow-up to that, I know that there's impression in industry and amongst people that polished concrete is well, more difficult to maintain and prone to staining. And what is it that suppliers and contractors can do to make sure that the polished concrete surfaces maintain their aesthetic surface, that they maintain that pleasing appearance?
Yeah, everybody used to think that polished concrete was kind of the magic bullet, the fit-all flooring, and it's not. Polished concrete doesn't belong in a lot of different areas. In areas where it's exposed to, you know, anything that's acidic, it doesn't belong. Any place that it may be prone to high staining, it doesn't belong. That's where coatings come in. That's where coatings, something that needs to be acid resistant, or something that needs to be completely covered, that cannot be seen, that's ideally where, you know, where coatings come in. But the key is for an architect to properly specify it in its proper use. And then aside from that, again, is making sure that the in-house staff or the contracted staff performs the maintenance properly, again, which is, you know, dry debris removal, you know, wet cleaning, and then also what also helps on top of that is, as needed, to use a burnishing pad, which sometimes are diamond impregnated, which will help basically pop the shine back and basically remove the micro scratches.
Jim made a great point. It's educating the customer. You know, it's easy to go and to sell a system, whether it's, you know, polished concrete or, you know, a polymer coating system, or, you know, a VCT, or you know, a towel. Basically, it's educating the customer. This is what you're going to get with this particular product, and then educating them how to clean it. I think that's where the industry really needs to come together to really educate versus trying to just sell a job.
Something I've found that's been helpful for owners is to have like an owner's manual for your floor. I mean, you have an owner's manual for your car, why not have it for your polished concrete floor? And in that manual, specify the type of brush that should be used, because even brushes for scrubbers, there's a wide range of bristle diameter, the stiffness, even there's grip brushes. So just knowing what type of brush, the cleaner, how often they should clean, pre-sweeping. Jim made a great point on that. That's very important. So many times I've went in and seen folks try to clean the floor with the scrubber. Just hop on the scrubber and try to clean the floor without pre-sweeping. And that dirt and grit gets washed around and in the floor and can damage it. So education is key, and having that owner's manual, because turnover is a big problem with the Jan Sand staff, whether it's outsourced or in-house, that the folks maintaining the floor need to know what to do. And us also, each party needs to work together. I've seen where the folks maintaining the scrubbers will put on a different brush than what should be used on that particular floor. So everybody kind of working together on that to achieve the same goal.
Assuming normal commercial pedestrian traffic, the lifespan of a coated commercial floor, and then we'll go to the polished
kind of a
concrete.
trick question, isn't it?
It kind of is, isn't it?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah,
Because
see
I don't think
what I do?
anybody can intelligently put a number, you know, because we have floors that have been done for, you know, 15 plus years. And honestly, there's no staining, there's no wear pattern, you know, other than maybe the building cracking, the floor cracking. overall, you know, you've got something that's going to be there for a long time. And I think when you get into how long is something going to last, you know, when people think, when they hear the word epoxy coating, the first thing people think about is, one, it smells, it stinks, and the other thing, it comes off. You know, and that's associated a lot of times with the thinner systems and also the old technology used to be out there. Now, the smelly stuff is still, quote, out there a little bit, but, you know, everything has moved to 100% solids. And you got to, you know, your different, you got your polyurethanes, you got your polyaspartus, your MMAs. So there's a lot of materials out there. But getting back to my point is that the thin film systems, there is going to be a life on those, and that may only be 5 years, and you're talking maybe a 5 to 8 mil coating, right, where you may have 5 to 10 years. But again, depending on how often they're cleaning it, how are they cleaning it, what the traffic is, whether it's foot traffic or we did mention pedestrian traffic. But what we found is when you get systems up to a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch, you've got floors that they will absolutely, they look like the day they've been done. So really to put a point on and say, how long does a polymer floor last? I don't think anybody can answer that because, again, I'm not trying to be evasive, no, but I think realistically is if it's applied properly and the right coating system is spec'd, you can have a floor. Usually I see people will change floors because of the colors. You know, that's a lot of times we'll do some recoats. We'll do some recoats on areas that are getting hammered by whatever equipment that they're using on the floor. So you can see a recoat, and that could be 5 years, 8 years, or 10 years. So again, if it's just walking traffic, you know, I think you've got to, I think longer than I'll be in this business. So I still plan on being around for a while. So.
Yeah, that is kind of a loaded question because there's so many factors that go into how long a surface will last. I mean, with polished concrete, it really starts with how well the surface was actually processed to the polished finish to begin with. You know, how well refined the surface was during the process. You know, what diamond abrasives were used. Densifiers come into play. That was brought up. But then again, you've got the maintenance of it. You know, is proper maintenance being conducted on the floor, and how is the floor being cared for? We have floors too that we've done 10 years ago, and they warehouse floors. I mean, they look spectacular to this day, but they properly maintain it, and they do all the maintenance things that they were supposed to do, and they spent a lot of extra money for us to make sure that that surface was fully refined from one grit to the next. They've got exceptional clarity of reflection in it, and as a result, they've got very high durability, and they maintain it properly. So I don't think you can put because of all of the variables, you can actually put a predetermined time. What we can tell you is that we have floors that are 10 years old that still look fabulous today. One last variable that you have to take into consideration is the quality of the concrete that the contractor has to work with. So again, you know, there's a lot of scenarios where that particular piece of concrete shouldn't have been polished in the first place. It probably would have been better off to have a coating.
Okay, Kevin, you want to weigh in?
Sure. Well, Jim's got a great point on the quality of the concrete. That's a very important issue in the life of polished concrete. And contractors can't control what they're working with. A soft floor, whether it's heavily carbonated, it's got soft aggregates, whatever, if it's a soft floor, it's not going to hold the shine and the look long term. So maybe another alternative such as coatings would be better in that situation. But that is a important factor is the actual quality of the concrete.
Are there any specific instances in a commercial setting in which one application would clearly have the advantage over the other?
I think the answer to that is yes. And I think it's been mentioned earlier that when you expect chemicals acids, things like that to get spilled on the floor, I think coatings are superior in that regard. I think polished concrete, when you expect high traffic or abrasion, like pallets being dragged across the floor, that's something the coating's probably not going to be able to stand. And so polished concrete, I think, is a better choice in that regard. Another thing is moisture. If you know that your slab has high moisture, if your MVER is high, moisture vapor emission rate, polished concrete is a good choice. Most coatings can't tolerate high moisture. There's some that can, and there's some new technology out there, but if you've got a high moisture content, it's not affected. It does not affect polished concrete unless you use dye. Now, if dye is used, there is some limitations there, but I guess in general, that's kind of the advantages for both types.
As far as moisture in the concrete, you know, the technology has been out there for years, and you know, now there's a lot of good moisture mitigating primers that you know, again, depending on the moisture levels, or a good barrier coat, they can go down before coatings. And there's even a lot of instances where we're seeing that the customer will just put that down anyways before you put the coating system down. So I agree, and I somewhat disagree that you know, again, I think a lot of things come into play. If there's chemicals involved or liquids involved, then you know, the polished concrete is definitely not the way of going. And then if high moisture content, then you know, there's products out there now that will deal with that issue.
All right. Last question, and it goes to Kevin.
Okay.
A common concern about both polished and coated concrete is in regard to public safety, and especially the slip and fall factor. How well does each type of the systems perform in wet, icy, slippery conditions? And can the systems be specified and engineered to account for those safety conditions while maintaining the aesthetics?
I think in general, there's places for each type, coatings and polished concrete, when it comes to slip resistance. Polished concrete, you don't want to use it on a sidewalk or a ramp outside. It's just not a good place to use that, because there's just, with ice and snow and water, it's just not a proper place for it. But inside on a flat floor, it actually has very good slip resistance, and is actually tested in some cases higher than coatings. So it's an excellent choice inside. And another factor is, I know we've mentioned the word guard. Misuse of guard can really affect the slip resistance of polished concrete. If there's an excessive buildup, that can actually lower the slip resistance quite dramatically. I've seen tests come back a 0.2 COF, which is equal to basically ice with the misuse of guard. So that's a very something that should be owners should be aware of. Without any guards, the COFs can be well above 5 and test very good, have a very good slip resistance. Outside coatings do really well, especially on ramps. If you use a grit or something in it to promote slip resistance or increase slip resistance. So in those cases, I think coatings, that's a good place for those on an exterior application.
The Concrete Polishing Association just did a workshop down in Texas where we actually measured with the BOT 3000 all the different stages of polished concrete. And the lowest DCOF measurement that we achieved was a 0.45. It consistently achieved right around a 0.68 throughout any of the stages through the process and all the different grits. So polished concrete definitely, meets and exceeds, any decal requirements.
Now, as far as slip resistant with coatings, it all is determined on, what the atmosphere is. So exterior coatings, you're going to go more for coating systems that are UV stable and are, subject to elements that, and usually typically more aggressive. On inside slip issues, slip resistance, there's that fine line of what is slip resistant and what is cleanability. And that's an issue that we've fought for years, is the customer wants a floor they're able to clean, but then they want a floor that they're not going to have slip and falls on. That's typically when you get into a wet, the wet environments like kitchens. So, again, it's designing a system based on what the slip requirements are. And, you get some pretty good slip resistance depending on the size of aggregate.
So now the other point that I wanted to make was that with polished concrete, unlike other flooring that's actually manufactured in a factory setting, where there's a lot of different tight controls and measurements that take place throughout the processing or the manufacturing of the material, we're manufacturing the floor on site with polished concrete. So what we have to do is we have to take that instrumentation that would be used in a factory setting and apply it on site while the concrete floor is being processed to a polished finish. So I think that a lot of people don't understand what polished concrete is. They think that we're going to show up with some buffers and we're going to slap some chemical down and it's going to be shiny and that's going to be it. But what they can really closely relate it to actually is the installation of a terrazzo floor. We use a lot of the same diamond abrasives, the same grinders, and a lot of the same equipment. So when you kind of put it in that perspective, it helps general contractors and architects better relate what's going on. But again, the big thing is we're actually highly refining and polishing the surface, unlike terrazzo, which is brought to a certain grit and then coated.
Do you think, Jim, that customers expect to see more aggregate showing? I think, what I see out there that customers say, well, I got my floor polished, but they don't see the aggregate. Do you think that, there's some customers that are looking for that exposed aggregate because it's more aesthetically pleasing?
Yeah, well, the tough part is I don't think customers exactly know what they're looking for. And a lot of times they see pictures on the internet and they go, that's what I want. And that kind of goes back to the whole mock-up thing and doing presentations and showing them the different aesthetic options. Overall, generally, I think people, they like that exposed aggregate or a seated glass, exposed aggregate look. But then we tell them the price and they decide that maybe a sand aggregate is, a better option.
So you would agree that, educating the customer, whether it's an architect or building owner, educating them more, on the polished end or on the polymer coating side, is educating what their options are. In some instances, for instance, I ran into a job where it was half terrazzo floor and the other half was concrete, and it had VCT over it. So they took the VCT off, and now they're like, what do we do? Can we polish this? And then the next question comes to me is, can we put a polymer coating on there? And to be honest with you, what I recommended was the VCT, because the coating, they couldn't afford to do a thick enough coating system is going to give them longevity. So then that's why we said, well, VCT, they know that you get some out of a retail store, will get that lifespan. So I think a lot of times it's just educating. And I think that's what the marketplace is missing is, coatings contractors and polishing contractors. I think we just need to better educate the architects and the building owners.
Yeah, I agree. Education is key. Education and then expectation management. Every polished concrete job comes out a little bit different, and being able to manage their expectations through the process is critical. But like you said, the key part of all of this is actually educating what they should expect. And what I have found is that architects actually enjoy contractor presentations because they're actually being given real-world situations and scenarios, whereas somebody who may be coming in to sell a product has the product knowledge but maybe not have the real-world application. So I mean, again, you kind of hit it: education, education, education.
I think your marketplace is more driven by the contractor showing the architect, what he's going to get, versus our market is the manufacturers are going to the architects and the engineers and the building owners, and they're showing them what they have.
You'd be surprised. It's actually chemical manufacturers have predominantly driven this market. And, I love the manufacturers, but at the same time, manufacturers' marketing department can come up with some pretty crazy stuff. So manufacturers are definitely a key component to all of this. But the polished concrete industry largely has been driven by chemical manufacturers up until now. And the association feels like the association is starting to have a little bit more of a hand in driving the industry and the education to the architects and owners and so forth.
Great, and part of that drive is standards. You're working on standards, is that correct?
Yeah, the Concrete Polishing Association, again, is at World of Concrete this year, we'll be actually introducing formal definitions of polished concrete, the different types of polished concrete. There's burnished polished concrete, bonded abrasive polished concrete, and then hybrid polished concrete. And then the association does recognize coated concrete, but because it's not manufactured through a mechanical abrasion process, it does not recognize that as a way to achieve polished concrete. But it does recognize it as a coating. And then also over the next year, through the different instrumentation that we're working with, you're going to start seeing coming up in specifications actually using these instruments and using quantifiable data to basically quantify the end result of a job, and trying to take the whole subjectivity part of it out of it, because right now polished concrete is very subjective.
I think it's important just to note that with polished concrete, it really just depends on the slab itself. And in a new construction setting, when the architect knows that floor is going to be polished, making sure that slab is of high quality from the batch plant to the time it's placed. And so too much air, wrong water cement ratio, there's so many things that can go wrong that can, at the end of the day, affect the life cycle of polished concrete. So just know that you're working with the concrete itself, and it's only going to be as good as what the slab is. So if there's any way to improve quality in a situation like that, that's always beneficial, and with polished concrete.
And that's actually one of the most exciting things going on with polished concrete, because the association has actually come out with mix design recommendations and finishing methods to make the surface that's going to be polished the most conducive to the polishing process. So that what you just said is huge. I mean, because a new construction where you can specify and help control those variables, you've eliminated a lot of the unknown coming into the polishing process.
The rule of thumb with coatings is you have to adhere. You have to have a strong, sound concrete or a surface to adhere to. And if you've got a bad concrete pour or concrete suspect, and you put on it, it's going to delaminate. That coating is going to, because the tensile strength of the coating is higher than the concrete. 9 times out of 10, and they'll just pull the concrete apart. So now there's variables that dictate, you know, what you should go on to and what you shouldn't go on to. So very similar. A recent webinar that I watched, there was a diagram that says, you know, trying to compare the maintenance of polished concrete and epoxy coatings and VCT. And I've seen many of charts like that the numbers are always skewed. And I'm not sure if it's the chemical people that are doing that, but when I see the numbers to maintain an epoxy floor or maintain a VCT floor, you know, I strongly disagree with those numbers that I keep putting out there. And I'm not sure, and I'm not saying it's the association, but it may be the chemical. And I just like to see that on an even kill, where it's, you know, let's be truthful that, you know, concrete polished floors, you know, polymer coated floors, and any other type of flooring, there's a maintenance and there's a cost. But you know, I see that exaggerated number, and it just kind of bothers me because I think a lot of that is because when I look at a floor that's been down, we've had down for 12 years, and all they're doing is cleaning the floor every day, or every other day. That's the same as anything else. So, you know, how can that claim be made? And I guess, and again, it's just it's the number game.
Well, I mean, I think the position of the association is that the life cycle before, for example, a polished concrete floor has to be repolished. And again, having a sound substrate that holds a good polish, and the process itself, when it's done correctly, full refinement from one grit to the next throughout the process, that you can drag things across the floor and you won't scratch it. We've actually taken a highly polished concrete floor, sat a 200-pound guy on a cinder block and pushed him around and not scratched the floor. Now, I don't know, and I'm not a coatings guy, so I don't know if that's possible with coatings, if it's not. But I think that that's where the life cycle comes in. I think that that's where polished concrete, they believe that they've got a significantly high life cycle. Whereas, let's just take VCT as another good example. With VCT, VCT, freshly stripped and finished VCT looks fantastic. But the life cycle before it has to be refurbished, top scrubbed and recoated, or completely stripped and recoated, is depending on traffic, because we know that that's a key component to all of this. But depending on traffic, can be as little as 3 months and as much as 9 months. Where in the same exact settings with polished concrete, I promise you, you would get anywhere between 7 and 10 years out of a polished concrete floor, easily, before you have to do anything. So, whereas, for example, coated VCT, and again, maybe some of the coatings that are softer coatings, they look really good, and then they degrade until they're finished again, and then they look really good, and then they degrade. With polished concrete, you've got much less of a roller coaster ride than you do with some of the other, especially the softer acrylics. So I think that's more the position. I haven't seen the numbers in the presentation, and you know, I think they're definitely worth looking at, and maybe even working with somebody like you to get them to where you think they need to be also.
I think we both agree. It all depends on what the floor is being used for,
Yep.
what the conditions are. You know, because again, you know, a situation where you have a lot of abrasion, you know, no question, polished concrete is an answer, you know, most of the time. Where, you know, epoxy floors, polymer type floors, they in you know, traffic areas or water areas, you know, you'll get along, you know, you'll get just as long as life out of those as, you know, if you compare it to a, you know, to a warehouse type floor with, you know, polished concrete. So again, it comes back to what we were saying, educating the marketplace.
Right, and specifying in its best use, you know, whether it's coated or polished.
Right.
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you for watching. Their contact information will be online after this presentation. And join us again for our next panel discussion.